In order to accommodate the transportation needs of an out-of-state witness, we are going to go out of order to number 14, Adam Pertman of the Donaldson Adoption Institute.
Thank you. And thank you for going out of order so I can see my kids.
Right. And before we begin, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is true?
I do.
And if you could just officially state your name and fire away.
Sure. My name is Adam Pertman. I'm president of the Donaldson Adoption Institute, a national nonprofit research organization based in New York. For the record, the Institute is independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan, and we don't make any money off adoption. We are essentially a think tank that develops best practices in adoption through research. I don't usually bring this up, but I will today for a reason. I'm also the author of a book titled Adoption Nation, the first edition of which came out over a dozen years ago, and a recent update was just published. And the reason I bring that up is to say that I have been studying adoption history, adoption research, adoption realities, and interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of adopted people, birth parents, adopted parents, for a dozen years. And I bring that up because there has been so much mythology and misunderstanding of adoption history that has been mentioned during this hearing this morning that I started taking notes. So in addition to, and I'm going to try to do this by bullet points so I don't take up too much time, but I think it's important that the record be clarified. A lot of premises have been put on the table as though they were true when adoption's history and the research don't indicate that. And so I think it's really important, and I will also give my testimony, which is research-based, in addition to hopefully clarifying some points that were raised this morning. You can get good anecdotes to prove anything. So I commend all sides for bringing their anecdotes to the table, their experiences to the table. It's important. We learn a lot from them. But good law is made in a different way. Good law is made with the anecdotes illustrating reality, illustrating research, illustrating what is best practice. That's what I hope I will bring to the table today. So I want to just start with a couple of broad statements and then move on to some specific ones. One, the history of adoption is not one of free choice for a lot of women who decided, oh gosh, I'm 18 and I'm having a tough time, so I'm going to sign this agreement and give my baby away and move on with my life. That's not the reality of adoption history. These women lived in a world in which their priests, their parents, their doctors, their friends all stigmatized them and said, you're not going to keep that baby. So whatever they signed or didn't sign, and by the way, if someone has a court document that is a real agreement to confidentiality, we would like to see it because as a matter of research, we've simply never found one. Amen. We've simply never found one. Were there verbal statements of that sort from lawyers, from social workers, and so forth? Of course there were. Of course there were. And there were also verbal assurances, oh, don't worry, you're going to see your child when she's 18. So how come we keep one promise that was verbally given and not another? The history simply isn't one of free choice. And a lot of the testimony you have heard presupposes that choice. And I will add, just sort of from a personal vantage, because I'm always intrigued by this notion, how many of you would like to be kept to a promise? Let's say that young woman, Susan X, was 17 and she had a baby and she really wanted to place that baby for adoption and move on, and society stigmatized it. She didn't want it. She didn't want to deal with it. How many of us would want to be held by law to a promise we made at the age of 17? Or to something we signed by 17, without ever asking, do you still want this? Did you change your mind? And we don't do that. We infantilize adopted people when we call them children, and some of them are 70 years old. And we infantilize all of these women by saying the state will decide what's good for you. You're not allowed to decide what's good for you. Well, we have done the research. Everybody wants to say good things, and God bless them for it, about protecting birth parent rights and adoptee rights and everybody's rights. We've actually done the research. We actually have some idea of what works and what doesn't. To make a very sharp point, what does work is the single biggest healing factor for women who have parted with children to adoption is knowing that their kid is okay. It is the opposite. It is the opposite of the stereotype. The seeking privacy, anonymity, secrecy forever. We don't see it. It's not in the research. The research indicates anywhere from 95% up want to know. And they're fine with giving up their names. They created this child. They want to know if she's okay or if he's okay. So policy and law that keep these records sealed, and by the way, there are lots of other reasons why adopted people want the records other than reuniting, but the policy and law, if it is ostensibly to protect the mental health and well-being of birth parents, the research shows exactly the opposite. It shows exactly the opposite. I have sent you all the research. I sent you written comments. I'm going to resend them. I want to make sure they do get into the record. And I urge you to look at them. I mean, you're going to hear a lot of good stories today, and I hope they're illustrative of something. But I think we have to know what the knowledge base is. So the knowledge base for our birth parent work is a report, a years-long research effort that ended in a report called Safeguarding the Rights and Well-Being of Birth Parents. We actually learned a few things in studying it. We did the same for unsealing records, which is called, there are three, we've put out 2 papers in that regard, for the records 1 and 2, and they deal with different aspects of this, and they all come to the same conclusions as another report that we put out, a study that we put out, on how to shape positive identity for adopted people. And all of the reports, and they don't start out this way. We start out as researchers trying to figure out what's up and what would constitute best practice. And all 3 of those, coming at different directions of adoption, because that's what we do, coming at different directions of adoption, all 3 wound up with recommendations that these records be unsealed. Because it is not just about curiosity. And again, that just trivializes it. It is about need. And not just the need to know whether I have a genetic disease, but if I am entitled to my own identity, well, there are lots of little girls who are Chinese, and their parents are white, and without some information, what is their identity? Now, you can extrapolate from that and say that if I am entitled, if an adopted person is entitled to his or her identity, how do you get that without knowledge? How do you get it? How do you get it without knowing your background? Is that little Chinese girl's identity her Jewish American parents' identity? How does she get hers? Now, in those cases, we, in our research and in our recommendations, we offer other ways to help her reinforce her identity. But in cases such as yours, the simple one is to ask. And we know from the research they want to be asked. We're protecting a bunch of, quote, protecting, a cohort of women who don't want your protection and who aren't being asked. And so in our research, we have asked. Okay. The other major overall point that I want to make, for the sake of argument, everybody is sincere in stating that they have genuine concerns. I get that. And their experience teaches them something about those concerns. In other states in which I've testified, those concerns are much broader. They're about abortion rates and about adoption rates, and there are a whole lot of concerns that a lot of people have expressed over the years about what will happen if legislation like this passes. It's no longer an experiment. It's no longer a hypothesis. We can talk until we're blue about what might happen, and we don't have to guess. There are a dozen states that have given all or nearly all adopted people within them the right to have their original birth certificates, just as you are considering legislation just like yours in one form or another. There are another dozen states that have given a lot, not complete, some prospectively, retroactively, all sorts of weird configurations. And you know what happened in those states? And all these concerns were raised in every single one of those states. And now we have a good decade or so to see what happened. And now we can know. And you know what happened? Nothing. Nothing. A lot of people got their birth certificates. Some of them used their birth certificates to search. Most of them didn't because the internet allows them to do it without the birth certificate. And a quick comment about the contact preference form. Is it true that someone can ignore it? Yes. But current law forces people not to know what that birth parent might want. Adopted people, adopted adults, we're talking about 18 and over, right? Adopted people are not ingrates. They're not children searching for new mommies and daddies. They're looking for the same things that all of us assume is a birthright, and that is identity. And they're deprived of a piece of it simply because of that piece of paper. For many of them, all they want is that paper. They don't want to search for whatever reasons. They want to be like everybody else. They want to fill that hole. And for most of them, they already have another means of finding. So this is just putting them on a level playing field. And that's what this does. There's no evidence in any state, in any of the research, that this ruins people's lives, that it undermines their relationships. None of that appears to happen. Will it happen at some point? Yes, it will. And it'll be big news. But you know, divorced dads snatch their kids, and we don't assume, oh my God, we can't have divorce. Look what happens. We do. I agree wholeheartedly that the benefits have to outweigh the risks. But in the real-life laboratories of other states, we can see what the risks are, what played out, and what benefits there have been. And the benefits appear to have been substantial, and the risks seem never to come to pass. And I'm sure one will, and it'll be a big deal. But we can't let that drive public policy. Okay, I don't know where I am. And I will try to wrap it up in just a couple of minutes. Sealing original birth certificates, I think, I'm an adoptive parent. I'm not here in that capacity. I agree with something viscerally with some of the work we do, and some sort of makes me uneasy, but it is the work we do. I'm here as a researcher, and I want to stress that. But as an adoptive parent, did I have some of these fears, concerns before we adopted our kids? You bet I did. And then I found out I was wrong. I did. Because the real life, flesh and blood human beings who created my children are exactly that. And they deserve to be treated with the respect that current law does not give them. The research, again, is crystal clear. We can say what we want about the promises that were made, but again and again, we don't know. We haven't seen the paper containing those promises. But we can say, we can believe that if we wish, but the reality is that adoption history, the history, legislative history, you can look it up in New York, you can look it up in 47 other states because 2 never sealed the birth certificates. You can look it up. The legislative history, these records were not sealed in order to protect birth mothers from anything. It was exactly the opposite. In every single state when they were sealed until roughly the middle to late 20th century, in every single state they were sealed for exactly the opposite reason, explicitly to keep that woman away from the adoptive family. And so this notion of protection is mythology. It's not rooted in history, and it's not rooted in the research of what we understand the needs are. And because this is a health issue and it keeps being raised as a health issue, I'm sure I'm going to forget something, but I'm going to wrap it up. Again, we trivialize it by making it curiosity. We trivialize it by saying somebody may have a genetic disease. Our research on positive identity development in adoptees makes it extremely clear that it's about psychological mental health. No, adopted people are not all debilitated, but they have an issue that is imposed on them. The women of the past, that was the other big thing I wanted to say and forgot. We're talking about a retroactive fix bill. New York is already an open adoption state. Every state of the union is already an open adoption state because that's all that's happening nowadays. The birth certificates are still sealed, but that child, as likely as not, is being babysat by his birth mother. But can't get the birth certificate because, God forbid, he'll know her name. I don't think it works that way. So we already are getting there, I should say. We already are getting there. But reality on the ground has far outpaced legislation. So this is retroactive. This is punishing the people who were part of that stigmatized age, women who weren't allowed real free choice, adopted people who felt embarrassed to ask anything because they were told they weren't supposed to, or they weren't told they were adopted. And by the way, our last publication, which was on the Internet's impact on adoption, very, very clearly, starkly, lays out that this is how retroactive this is, because today almost everybody can find somebody. So we're talking about fixing what happened before. Did anybody see the movie Philomena?
Yes.
It's about a birth mother from Ireland who searched for her son and finds that he had died. And that's what's happening in state after state, New York included, while politicians and policymakers ponder what should we do for the future. Well, for the future, almost everybody is going to find who they want to find. They're going to know all this stuff. But the Philomenas of the world, and there are so many in the United States, the Philomenas of the world are going to die, or their children are going to die. And they're never going to get what the only thing that the research indicates really helps them heal. Thank you for listening to me today.
Well, thank you.
I will say that prospectively, if you want any research on any of this, and I have provided it in electronically, but we would be delighted to provide the research we have done, or look up whatever pieces that you feel you need.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I must say I think your testimony has been very refreshing, and I really appreciate it. And I think we're going to very much value the material that you have sent and will send, and mindful of your need to get to Penn Station.
I've got a half hour. So feel free.
I just have one. Dr. Pertman, what state is the state that we should be looking at as far as that of adopted laws that basically demonstrate the statistics that you've indicated?
The best record keeping to date that I'm aware of is Oregon, though there's some record keeping in most of the states. It's not perfect. And by the way, in terms of when given the opportunity to say no on the preference form, it's something, I can't even remember. It's certainly less 1%, but I think it's like 0.4%. I'm not saying that those women, should be trampled or be denied the right, but there are all sorts of laws. If you're stalking, and adoptees aren't stalkers, and the current law presupposes they'll do something wrong, right? If we didn't think they'd do something wrong, we'd just give it to them. And I don't presuppose that adopted people are going to do something wrong. And the indications from Oregon and other states is that it doesn't happen. And it's really solid statistical research-based proof that we're talking about a tiny percentage of women. And maybe we should look at something for them after the fact, some counseling, some assistance. That would be great. But you don't hold back 99.4%. because 0.6% might have an issue, and I stress might.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much.